of teams that blew weeds last week, what was my biggest concern about Baltimore going into the year? Mr. Unger, what did I tell you about the Baltimore Ravens last year? I told you they were the only team in the NFL for the first 10 games to have a double-digit lead in every game, and their record was 7-3. This year, they have trailed for the third least amount of time through 10 games in NFL history. Yet, they're not 10-0 like the other teams. They're 7-3. Why? Because they cannot finish off a game. And I will say this: your father, good old Dan Unger, called it last week right here in the comment section on Championship Rings. He said the Browns are going to win this game. And I'll also say, ladies and gentlemen, if you are a Cleveland Browns fan, we've both been living in Cleveland at least my whole life. That was the best victory. I don't care. Throw the playoff game against Pittsburgh in a COVID era that really didn't count out the window. That was the best Browns win in our lifetime. Given the circumstances, the way they came back, that's a game the Browns have lost for 50 years.
Okay, so let me say this. I had this, going into this game, I had the same thought I had going into the game against San Francisco. I thought the Ravens were absolutely going to steamroll us. When I did my video collaboration with Engraven Bids, I said Baltimore was going to win 27-21, but I wouldn't have been surprised if Baltimore ended up blowing us out. And at one point, I think it was late in the third quarter, Odell Beckham catches a pass and he goes right into the end zone, and it's 24-9. And I'm like, okay, here we go. It's blowout time. And then the wheels just fell off the wagon for the Ravens. Now, as a Browns fan, I'm very happy about this because guess what? It puts the Browns at 6-3, and we'll get to the AFC North stuff in a minute. But it puts the Browns in a position where if the Bengals beat the Ravens on Thursday Night Football and the Browns beat the Steelers on Sunday, then the Cleveland Browns, I believe, jump into first place in the AFC North.
Yes, they do, and it's improbable. And we were sitting here after the Seattle game saying, can Stefanski do his job? Which, once again, the Browns were completely unprepared. They fell behind 17-6 early, 24-9 late, as you mentioned, 31-17 with 8 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And yet Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns did just enough to save Kevin Stefanski's job because Deshaun Watson, who could not hit either me or you sitting in this TV screen in the first half, decided to come out and play possessed in the second half and not miss a pass. And Myles Garrett may have had the best half of his career disrupting Lamar Jackson. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that game right there that you watched this past Sunday is the reason why I don't want to hear any of the Baker Mayfield fanboys say, oh, we should have kept Baker Mayfield. That is why you go out and you get what you thought was an MVP level caliber quarterback in Deshaun Watson. That was vintage Deshaun Watson in the second half. That is why the Browns paid him all that money. That is a game the Browns, as I said, have watched for literally 50 years since they won the last NFL championship they won in 1964. They find a way to lose those games. Guess what? They didn't lose it on Sunday, and that is why this Browns team feels different. And if you can get that level of play out of Deshaun Watson moving forward, not only are the Browns playoff contenders, but with that historic defense they can potentially have, they are Super Bowl contenders.
If you look at the rest of the Browns' schedule, it's fairly easy. There's nothing daunting about it. This week you have Pittsburgh at home. Next week at Denver. Week 13 at the Rams. That could be a little bit tricky because we know what Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp can do. Week 14, you're home against the Jaguars. Week 15, home against the Chicago Bears. Week 16 at Houston. That's going to be a tough game because of C.J. Stroud and the way the Texans are playing. I don't care what you say.
Because if your MVP candidate, C.J. Stroud, even though they're going to have 6 losses by then, he'll still be in the MVP conversation.
No, he won't. Week 17, home against the New York Jets on Thursday Night Football. And then week 18, you finish up the season at Cincinnati. That's really not a daunting finish to the season.
So let's get into this. So all AFC North teams play each other in Week 10. Obviously, we've talked about the Bengals, Ravens, Thursday Night Football, Steelers, Browns, Sunday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Josh, the specifically the Bengals Ravens game, as you know, I'm Brandon's World every Thursday. I make my money line predictions and my 5 best bets for every week. I have no idea yet which way I'm waiting for the Cincinnati-Baltimore matchup because both teams need it. Baltimore has a bad taste in their mouth after that loss last week to the Browns. They lost badly to Pittsburgh in Week 5 when they shouldn't have lost. Yet Cincinnati, I don't believe they have a division win yet. They've lost to the Browns. They've lost to Baltimore. They have yet to play Pittsburgh. They have 4 losses already. Baltimore has 3. If Baltimore wins this game, they're essentially up 3 games because they have the 2 wins plus the tiebreaker, which is another game because it's head-to-head. So the Bengals need this more.
100%.
I would lean towards Cincinnati if I knew T. Higgins was playing. Because as I just said, if Higgins and Chase are healthy, I think Cincinnati can beat anybody in the NFL on any given Sunday. But when they don't play, Cincinnati's a different offense. Could we very well see Baltimore have a 14-point lead and blow it again? I think that's very possible. Listen, I defended Jim Harbaugh early on the show. I'll defend John Harbaugh. He's been a great coach for years.
Oh, yeah.
For the Ravens. That's why I think a lot of Ohio State fans hate Jim because their bias flows over. It's like all of Ohio hates the Harbaughs. Nonetheless, very fascinating to see that game. And as I said last week on Brandon's World, I best bet Pittsburgh every week practically because I know what I'm getting. I know I know exactly what the Steelers are. They're going to win low-scoring games. They're going to be in until the fourth quarter. They're barely going to score any offensive points. But Kenny Pickett's going to be in there in the fourth quarter. And Kenny Pickett's going to make one good throw. And the Steelers are going to win games they should. In Cleveland, I don't know if that's going to work. The line right now is 4. But there's
5.5, actually.
Oh, it went up today. Okay, so it went up because originally when it came out, it was 4. So yeah,
I just looked. Cleveland is favored by 5.5. But
at 5.5, I'll tell you, I would take Pittsburgh with the points. I think the Browns are going to win, but at 5.5, I would take Pittsburgh. I think if it's 3.5, 4, I would take the Cleveland side of it. I think, but there's a little bit of concern on the Browns side because allegedly Deshaun Watson was in a walking boot. I don't know if you heard about this.
I did
after the Baltimore game. So who knows? It's a pivotal game. I think it's a more pivotal game for the Browns. You cannot come off that loss or that win, against Baltimore and then get swept by Pittsburgh who can't move the ball.
You know what's hilarious with the Steelers? I think I saw the statistic earlier. They've been outgained
in every game, and they're 6-3.
It makes no sense. You know what I say about the Steelers? They're not winning. That's not to say they're not a good team. But here's how I'll say it. They're not winning. They're Mike Tomlining.
Yes, it is the most classic Mike Tomlin Pittsburgh Steeler way, which is what scares me about this game because here's the other thing. Those 2 tackles for the Browns, they played pretty good. According to PFF, they did pretty decent against the Ravens. It's a whole nother animal to go against T.J. Watt and Heinz Smith on that Steeler defensive line.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say T.J. Watt and Myles Garrett are dueling each other for Defensive Player of the Year this season. And I would say you were talking about how Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes are the only 2 names in MVP discussion earlier. I would say no disrespect to Micah Parsons in Dallas. No disrespect to Nick Bosa in San Francisco. But right now, Defensive Player of the Year is a 2-person race.
And I completely agree with that.
And Myles Garrett.
And by the way, I actually think Garrett's ahead by a wide margin. Ooh. And also, this is why I have been so critical of Myles Garrett. How many times did I come on when I had you on Brandon's World and I told you they should trade Myles Garrett? I said he doesn't do anything. He doesn't impact the game. what he's done this year for the first time since he's been drafted. He actually shows up when it matters. He's actually making plays outside of his 1.5 sacks in garbage time. It's a miracle what good coaching can do for a great pass rusher like Garrett. And we always known had the ability, but he never reached the impact what was a TJ Watt at until this year if you actually watched him closely.
Okay, but getting back to the Cincinnati-Baltimore game on Thursday night. This is, like I said earlier when we were talking about the Bengals, this is absolutely a must-win game for the Bengals. I wouldn't say it's a must-win for the Ravens. I understand what you're saying, that Baltimore wants to get that bad taste out of their mouth from last week's game against the Browns. What you're saying makes sense. But again, right now, the Bengals come into this game at 5-4. They've lost to the Browns. They've lost to the Ravens. They've lost to the Titans. And they've lost to the Texans. Their only win against an AFC team was against Buffalo. So right now, Cincinnati would not have the tiebreaker against anybody but the Buffalo Bills. If the Bengals lose this game, not only do they fall to 5-5, they get swept by the Ravens, and they just dig themselves a larger hole.
I want you on record. If the Bengals lose this game, are you saying that they're going to miss the playoffs?
I'm not going to definitively say that because they still have Joe Burrow, they still have Jamar Chase, they still have T. Higgins. But if they lose this game, they're putting themselves in a huge lot of trouble. I'll say it like that.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here. Mine is almost with a caveat on the Cincinnati side. I think if Higgins doesn't play, I think Baltimore probably wins. If T. Higgins plays, I will take Cincinnati. For the Browns-Steelers game, if Watson is a go, no matter if he's healthy or not, no matter if he leaves the game or not, I'll take Cleveland. I think it's going to be very low scoring. I think it's going to be a defensive battle. I think we could see a defensive touchdown that ultimately decides it. I think it's like a 2017, maybe even a 17-14 like ball game.
Okay, so before I get to my score predictions, because I'm going to give those, I know that the Minnesota-Denver game, I get why they kept it in Sunday Night Football, but I wish they had flexed this Steelers-Browns game.
So everybody thought that, and I actually found out there's a new rule this year in the NFL. If a division game has played on primetime already early in the season, like the Steelers and Browns did, they are not allowed to play on primetime again.
That's stupid.
They want more flexibility because I thought the same thing too, and then I found out about that rule. So,
I mean, I was saying to you last week that the Browns-Ravens game on Sunday should have been on Sunday night.
How about that Jets-Raiders game? I'm sorry. That was worth a 3-hour game. That was a good game. I'm sorry. That was a fun game. That wasn't fun to you? Old school football, seeing if Zach Wilson can go in a game. That was 3 hours of seeing if Zach Wilson can put together one. I had the time of my life. I'm not even joking. Was the Browns and Ravens game good? Yeah, it was good the last 5 minutes. It wasn't really competitive until like the last 5 minutes. That Jets-Raiders game was very interesting. The punts back and forth, field, I enjoyed it. It was old school football.
Oh, boy. Anyway, getting to my score predictions, as much as I want to pick Cincinnati so that the Browns can take over first place in the AFC North, I have too much respect for John Harbaugh and the Ravens. There's a reason John Harbaugh has been the head coach for the Baltimore Ravens as long as he's been there. You know, multiple division titles, like 2 or 3 AFC championship game appearances, a Super Bowl. Like, that's the reason the Ravens have been so good over this period of time. They've stuck with John Harbaugh. They've sustained what's been working for them. You know, Ozzie Newsome left. Has that changed anything for the Ravens? No. They've It's been the same thing. I could say the same damn thing about the Pittsburgh Steelers. They went from Chuck Noll to Bill Cowher to Mike Tomlin. Has Mike Tomlin had a losing season? No, he has not. He's been to the Super Bowl twice, won one of them, won the AFC North multiple times, been to the AFC Championship game like 3 times, I believe. That's why the Ravens and Steelers have been the class of the AFC North for so long, is because they've stuck with what's been working. Joe Flacco was with the Ravens for, God, I don't even remember how many years. The Steelers drafted Ben Roethlisberger back in 2004, and he only just recently retired. Whereas with the Browns, and this is what drives me crazy about them, is they don't stick with the head coach and quarterback. It's like a revolving door. Back in 2014, when we had Brian Hoyer as our quarterback, Mike Pettin as our head coach, that was the year Kyle Shanahan was our offensive coordinator. It looked like the Browns were maybe going to reach the playoffs that season. But what happened? Ownership stepped in and said, no, we want to see Johnny Manziel because we drafted him, which that was a dumb draft pick. I was even
All right.
saying,
Get your pick. Who
okay,
wins?
sorry. I have a tendency to go off on my tangents. But in terms of my pick, I'm going to go with Baltimore on this one for the Thursday night game. And no way we're getting swept by the Steelers. No way.
You heard it here first.